Hey everybody, this is Melina. Welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for being here and being a subscriber. I appreciate you so much. I wanted to show you 3 ways that I use the Tim Holtz stamp platform. I'll be using these watercolors that are in the green box and this heavy-duty basil white cardstock, just because I found out right before I started this video that I'm out of watercolor paper and I needed the watercolor paper. So I'm going to try this heavy white cardstock from Basil and see how that works for me. Now, if you have not ever used a stamping platform, I'm just going over how I do this really quickly. Those are the magnets, and they are strong magnets that come in the platform box, come along with the platform. And I have just put some little strips of washi around it and made a little tab at the top just so that I can grab them easily and I'm not having to use my fingernails to pick those magnets up. Now, this is a stamp set from Concord and Ninth, and it is meant, this little stamped image is meant to be stamped like in a circle on a square piece of paper. This is just a scrap piece of paper I got out of my stash just to show you 101 how to use this stamp platform. Now, I placed the stamp on the paper where I wanted it, and then I moved over the lid and it attached itself to the stamp, and then I ink on the stamp as it's on the lid, then close the lid and press pretty firmly, and you'll get the stamped image. And sometimes when you do that, the stamp will stick to the paper, especially if it's a brand new stamp. So all you have to do is just put your hand underneath the lid and just hold that paper down. As long as that paper is in the same spot, you're going to get a good image. Now here I have flipped the paper over, and I'm going to use the stamp in the exact same position, but just going to use a different color ink just so that you can see how it stamps again in a lighter color. And that's what these repetitive stamps are meant for. It's meant to, like, make a wreath or something. Of course, it's supposed to be on a square piece of paper so all sides are even, and this is not, but I improvise, and I'll show you in just a minute what I'm going to do with this card front. I did not even measure this piece of paper, like I said, or cardstock. It was just in my stash. So here I'm going to have to move that stamped image because we're changing the angle of that cardstock. So I'm going to take the image off, and it sticks really well. And I'm going to place the image how I want it stamped again, and I'm happy with that. So I'm going to move that lid over, and I should have put my magnets on it first. See, it moved that cardstock up. So remember to put your magnets on the edges of your cardstock paper, whatever you're stamping on, so that it can help to hold that down. And then I'm going to stamp that image again and get a nice little repeat. And yes, the middle is a hot mess, but I cover that up, so no worries. So I'm going to flip it one more time. So this is the 4th time. And with it being a different size, and I didn't learn from the other time to put my magnets on. Since it is a different size, it's not square, I'm having to reposition for that last stamp. and this is that darker green. My stamp platform and both of those inks are from scrapbookingwithme.com. I'll leave the link in the description. Okay, and there is my image, and it does look like a hot mess, but I'm going to use some paper punches, scalloped circle paper punches, to punch just a couple of papers, cardstocks from my stash. I'm going to adhere those down, and then I'm going to stamp a sentiment in the middle of that green die cut piece in just a minute, and we'll use this same stamp platform. I love that there's no guesswork to this. There's no making sure that you're straight on. You just place it where you want it, even, straight, however, and then you turn that lid over on top of that, stamp, and you are good to go. I love it. Now I get out an Illustrated Faith stamp set for the little sentiment that I'm going to put in there, and it says moments big and small, and I'm getting it how I want it. Doing a video, I can't just put my head right over it because you would see the top of my head then. So I'm trying my best to put that straight on without obstructing your view. And now I'll put that lid over on it. Now when it is just words or a sentiment, you don't have to press as hard. See, that is all that it needed, was that little tap with my fingertips, and I got a clear, crisp image. Now I'm just going to back this oddly shaped piece of white cardstock with a piece of olive cardstock. I believe that is left over from some Stampin' Up cardstock that I have in my stash. That's a craft piece of scallop, and then another piece of the olive that I cut with the paper punches there in the middle. And then that is just a card base that I cut to size for this so that I could have 1/8 of an inch on all sides like a mat. And that olive mat behind the piece would show up really well. And I think that turned out quite well. I will have some still shots at the end. Don't go away. We have 2 more cards to make. The next one is watercolor. The third one will be watercolor, but in a totally different way than I've ever done it before. I am cutting some card bases with that Basil heavy-duty white cardstock that I showed you at the beginning of the video. That piece that I used before with the little wreath type stamp was just a regular piece of white cardstock. I wasn't going to watercolor on that one, so I figured that would be all that I needed for that card. Now I got out the watercolor palette, and I'm dipping in water and putting over in this little pan that I think I got from Dollar Tree. It's just a little section for actually appetizers, but I use it in my scrapbooking, my crafts. So I'm adding some water to this to dilute that color down some and get it really thin. I will actually pour in water here, and I'm getting it super thin. I'm picking 3 colors that I like, that I think will go well together. And this is like a aqua turquoise color, and then this is a sunflower yellow color. And I will add some more water to that. And then you just add watercolor from the palette back into that just until you get the consistency that you want. I'm wanting it pretty thin so that I can get the look that I'm going for. And then I pick a blue, but it's not a, I guess it would be considered a navy. It's, I think, between a royal blue and a navy. So I pick that as my other color, and I'll do a sample piece in just a minute to see how these colors run together. As, you know, make sure that they don't cause some kind of weird, yucky, diluted color when they run together. I try to do that before I watercolor, after I pick my colors that I'm wanting to use, just to make sure that I'm not going to get some kind of yuck color if they run together. So there's that blue. It's almost kind of like a cornflower blue. And then there's the mint or aqua color. And I'm wiping off my brush, washing it off with water, and then wiping it off in between each. And there is that sunflower yellow, and the aqua really turns it a different color, but I like how it looks. So I'm ready to try it on my card front. And I just got a piece of packaging from something I got. Doesn't matter as long as it's acetate kind of feeling packaging. And I'm going straight to my palette to pull color and put on this packaging, and then I will blend and drop on some of the diluted color from the little container here, just so that I try to keep from having those streaks where I brushed it on the packaging. I don't want that. I want it more subtle than the streaks and stuff. So I'm putting on this diluted watercolor, and I am washing off and wiping off my brush in between each time, just so that I don't get that diluted mixed up color too much before I put it on the card front. And it's really, really runny, so I decide that the card front needs to just go on top of the packaging instead of the other way around. So I'm just pressing, and then I'll flip, and I'm just pressing again, trying not to do my fingertips or any kind of harsh lines or anything while I'm pressing down. I peel off the packaging and had plenty to do another card front if I wanted to. And now I'm going to let the colors run a little bit. I'm going to help them out just a little bit too, because I have that one little spot there at the top that I want it to run to. And then I'll do the same at the bottom with the yellow. And I even go into the palette itself and get the look I'm wanting with that yellow at the bottom. I like that. So I'm going to let those colors dry some, and this paper does bow up just a little bit, but it's so thick that it wasn't major. So I'm going to set that aside and let it dry, and I'm showing you that packaging could be used again on another card print. I love this way of watercoloring. So here is another way to use stamps when you're watercoloring. I have not used this technique ever, and so I'm trying it out on y'all, and let me know how you like it. I'm using the Tim Holtz stamp platform again. I'm lining up this faux brick looking background stamp that's in 3 pieces. I'm lining it up how I want it, making sure to remember to place my magnets on. And it's not perfect, but I'm fine with that. It's not meant to be perfect. So, and this big stamp, it was the first time I'd ever used it. And so, it wanted to stick really bad to the paper. And so I'm pushing it against that lid just to make sure that it stays on there well. I did get this stamp set from scrapbookingwithme.com, and I don't know if it's still available or not. I think that was a blue fern stamp set. I'll have to look. I'm going on the stamp itself with a paintbrush and the watercolor paints. And I realized that I shouldn't add too much water to it, because with the crevices and stuff in the stamp, it just goes down, and when you add too much water, it just goes down into that. So I'm trying not to add too much. I go back with this light brown and do another stamp with it in just a minute. I'm going to pick up some darker brown from my palette and get it wet, just because that particular little color has not been wet yet today. And so I start just willy-nilly putting on some dark brown onto my stamp and making sure that it stays on top, the raised edges of the stamps, because that's the part that's going to actually stamp onto the paper. So I stamp it once here, and I press pretty firmly just to make sure that everything goes down and it's even. And then when I pull it up, it sticks to the paper, and that's why I'm putting it right back down. As you can see, only really the dark brown showed up. So I'm going to go back in and add some more of the light brown and not add as much water, just so that I can get a thicker consistency on that stamp. And I'm just going to go around the edges of where that dark brown already is, so that I can fill in all the empty space. I'm glad I tried this method or this technique. I'm glad I tried it, because I think this may be my favorite of all 3 of the cards that I made today. Which I do love all 3 of them, but this one, I guess just because I had never tried it before, this one just went beyond my expectations as far as how it turned out. Now, I'm still not satisfied with how muted that light brown is, so I go in, clean off my brush, barely put water on it now that the ink spot, or the paint spot has been wet for a little bit, and go in and really douse it. and I press firmly just so that I can get those empty spots filled in. Of course, it's not going to be perfect because it's not a perfect stamp. It's a distressed looking stamp. But I'm very happy with that. I love how it turned out. I think I actually giggled and squealed a little bit whenever I took that lid off. That second time, I was very happy with that result. I'm going to take that off, and don't do as I do, do as I say. Clean off your stamps as soon as you get done with it. That stamp is still sitting in my craft floor, not clean. I'll get to it though. And now I've decided that I'm very impatient and I want to hurry up this drying process, so I get out my little heat tool. It's an old Stampabilities heat tool that I'm using here. And I'm doing this just because I want to add some splatters onto both of these card fronts. And I don't want the splatters to mingle in too much with these colors. So I'm skipping through that boring process for you just a little bit. And as you can tell, that watercolor, just the blues and greens and yellow, that card front is still rather wet, but I'm okay. I'm just going to keep going. Now I'm adding some copper and some gold splatters to this brick front stamped card front. Brick front stamped card front. And when you're doing splatters like this, you want your paintbrush to be really wet when you dip into that paint spot, just so that you can get a really juicy paintbrush whenever you start to knock on it to get the splatters onto your project. And when I start doing paint splatters, I just continue. I keep going and keep going and keep going. I just love the look of the splatters. Now I'm going to go in and do that same mint or turquoise aqua color, whatever it is, and straight on, not really diluted much, and add some of that in because it got really dark as it dried. It got really dark, so I wanted that aqua color to show through, because I'm actually going to put this card front onto an aqua looking card base. So I wanted it to match really well, and I'm going to go in with that same yellow and do some yellow splatters. And I'm moving it away from that other card front so that these colors don't get in on my neutral colors on that one. And I really love how that yellow is mingling in with that green. It looks really good. And then I decide to go with a dark blue color. It's not the cornflower blue that I used with the watercoloring. I'm going with a different, it's in a whole other row on my watercolor palette. And I just wanted to get some dark splatters onto this card base because I just felt like it needed it. So I'm happy with that, and I'm going to start using my heat tool again to get those colors pretty much dry because I want to stamp on top of this. And of course, I'll be using that Tim Holtz stamp platform again. I'm just showing you how I was drying both of them. The brick looking card front dried a whole lot faster than the watercolor one, just because it was a lot more saturated than this brick looking one. Now I pull out a stamp set from Felicity Jane that has this pretty little floral image, and I want to stamp it pretty much in the middle of the watercolor puddle. And before I place my magnets, that you could see I was feeling to make sure that that was dry before I did. I'm just trying to get a feel of where I want this stamp, and I don't want to stamp it all the way at the bottom because I'm going to stamp a sentiment at the bottom of it, and I want it to kind of fade out into the sentiment. So I don't stamp this image as hard and as dark as I will the sentiment, because I want it to kind of blend in with the puddle of watercolor. Now I'm using a StazOn ink just because I am stamping right up against watercolor and I want to make sure that it stays. Now I'm pressing pretty hard, but I didn't put a lot of ink on this image just because I wanted it to be pretty faint. So as you can tell, it is, and I have the look I'm going for, and I'm just trying to flatten out that cardstock before I add my sentiment piece onto the bottom. And this one says bloom where you are planted. I get that position where I want it and pull the lid over, and it's really, really stuck to that paper, the cardstock, just because A, it's a new stamp, and well, to me it's a new stamp, and B, it has watercolor on it, so it's a little tacky. And now I'm getting that image really, really stamped well, and I want it to stay really good and be pretty dark, so I'm pushing around on it pretty good and hoping that those letters on there do not blur. And they don't. I was very happy with the results of that. And I will cut that down in a minute and get it added to a card base. And then for this card front, I cut a 3-inch long, and I think that might be 1.5 inches, maybe 1.25 inches wide piece of cardstock, just a craft piece in my stash. And I'm going to glue that down. I would use my ATG pink adhesive gun, but since it's going up against watercolor and it's kind of up off the cardstock, I just wanted to make sure that it stayed really well. So I'm using some liquid glue to get that stuck down how I want it. I'm going to go where that empty space is, and then I'm going to use 2 stamps from that same Felicity Jane stamp set, and I'm going to line them up together. This always makes me nervous because it's 2 different fonts and 2 different stamps, but I'm going for it. I'm going to get it lined up. I cut out here just a second just so that I can put my head over the top of it to make sure it's straight, Then I pull the lid over and get it put onto that so that I can ink it up really well. This is my favorite way and my favorite use of a stamp platform. Whether you have the Tim Holtz one or not, this is my favorite way to use this. And I just pat lightly. I'm not patting as hard as I usually do on a bigger stamp, or one that doesn't have words, just because I don't want the words to blur. And it turned out just like I wanted it to. It says, just happy, my favorite place to be. I think that's the wording. And then I'm going around with a glitter pen that is like a bronze color. And I'm just doing a little bit of doodling around the edge of that craft piece of cardstock just to finish off this card front. Then I will be cutting it down just a little bit and putting it on a craft piece or a craft card base. And I'm going to use my We Are Memory Keepers corner punch on the deco setting around on that brick card front. Now here's where I will be cutting it down, and then I'm just going to show you still shots at the end of the card base that I put them on. That is my new Fiskars trimmer that I'm using. My other one bit the dust. There is the freehand kind of watercolor card, and I put it on that aqua base, card base. There's an up close for you. And here is that first card that we made with the Concorded Night floral wreath image. And that's an up close for you. That's how that sentiment piece stamped. I love how that turned out. And then here is the brick watercolor card. I don't know what I'm going to call this card, but there it is. Just happy, my favorite place. I love how this one turned out. I love the splatters around on it. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Y'all do not know how much I appreciate you. Please subscribe. Click that like button. Thanks. Bye, y'all.